Hello everyone, today we're exploring some chilling stories with a Soviet-era vibe, straight from the Russian Creepypasta forums. Before we get started, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much. Sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy. This story happened to me when I was 16 years old. My grandmother was originally from a small taiga village where, at the time of my last visit, only 12 inhabited households remained. There were 6 children in her family, and they all scattered to live in various cities across the vast Soviet Union. As it turned out, only one of my grandmother's sisters stayed to live in the village. We used to visit this wonderful place often in the summers. Majestic pines, a winding, clear river, the sounds of nature, and many other charms of village life. Then one time my grandmother came to visit us and told my mother that she was planning to go see Galka, that's her sister's name, saying they were getting old and who knew when they'd see each other again. Hearing this conversation, I started begging my grandmother to take me with her. Firstly, my parents had started building a cottage that summer, and the prospect of spending my entire summer mixing mortar, handing bricks to alcoholic construction workers, and inhaling the aroma of brick dust mixed with the smell of Prima cigarettes did not appeal to me in the slightest. Secondly, why not spend 2 weeks fishing and riding horses? Especially since Aunt Galia's neighbors had a grandson named Yegor who visited almost every summer. We had crossed paths a couple of times and got along pretty well. Surprisingly, my mom agreed easily, and before I knew it, I was bouncing along with my bag in a stuffy PAZ bus. After 10 hours of torment on our roads, we finally reached the village. The welcome was organized at the highest level. All the local residents were present. As is customary, they drank, reminisced about the past, cried, and it all ended with songs like Zikina's "From Afar for a Long Time." I simply cannot convey my mood to you when I found out that Yegor wasn't coming, and I would now have to entertain myself for 2 weeks. I should mention right away that Aunt Galia's house was quite large. I was given a spot in the far section, and as soon as I settled into bed, I immediately plunged into the realm of Morpheus. Oddly enough, I woke up in good spirits. The window was open and the room was so fresh and smelled so strongly of wildflowers that even the most inveterate pessimist would have smiled involuntarily. I could already hear preparations for breakfast in the kitchen. My grandmother and her sister were laughing, clattering dishes and setting the table. I quickly got dressed, went out to say good morning, and saw Aunt Galia's son. How could I have forgotten about Uncle Vitya? He was a ranger in the local forests and spent part of his summer visiting his mother. He was a good guy, knew the forest like the back of his hand, and used to tell Yegor and me very interesting stories about it. We exchanged a firm handshake and traded phrases like, "Wow, you've shot up! How's life?" and so on. After breakfast, he offered to take me hunting, to which I gladly agreed. We had to hike to an old hunting cabin which was about 10 miles away. After a quick packing session, we hit the trail. At first, the walking was easy. Even though the bright sun pierced through the crowns of the age-old giants, it was cool in the pine forest. The mind-blowing scent of pine needles and herbs and the sounds of countless birds, so unaccustomed to a city dweller, made our journey exciting. We stopped to fish and caught 3 pike for fish soup. In short, it was pure bliss. But after some time passed, fatigue began to set in. For those who haven't been in the real taiga, I'll say that it's not the place they show in movies, a neat little path and small spruce groves. In reality, there are fallen pines. The path dips down and then climbs steeply upward, and branches constantly try to whip you in the face. In short, there are some unpleasant moments. By evening, we came out to a large clearing, and Uncle Vitya said that the hunting cabin was just past it. I happily bounded into the tall grass, but he stopped me and said it would be better to walk around this place. Displaying all my youthful maximalism, I started arguing with him, explaining the geometric laws of drawing a straight line, trying to persuade him to take the shorter route, but for some reason he was adamant. So, in a foul mood, I followed him as he skirted this enormous clearing. He tried to get me talking, but I made it abundantly clear in every way that I was deeply offended. "Trust me, it's better this way," my uncle said. "How so?" I countered. "All right then, listen. Everyone in the village used to mow grass on this field together." My companion began his story. It was divided into plots for each house, and the haymaking would begin. The village elder divided the field. He divided it fairly and didn't slight anyone, but one time your grandmother and I almost got offended by him. It happened one day when she and I went to gather the hay into stacks. We arrived at our plot and started raking the hay. We saw a girl working alone in the distance on another plot, yet the two of us were gathering one stack, and in that same time, she did 3. "Vitka, whose plot is that?" your grandmother asked me then. "That's the elder's plot, and that's his daughter working over there, but for some reason she's alone. But look what a plot the elder took for himself. The grass is so thick since she's tossing those stacks so quickly. What a sly fox." And we went back to work. Suddenly, we hear Polinka, that was the elder's daughter's name, yelling something to us and waving her arms, calling us over. So I tell your grandmother, "Go see what she wants over there and I'll keep working." She left and I stayed to work. Some time passes and she comes back completely pale and says, "I'm walking toward Polina, but she keeps backing further away and keeps calling me." I followed her right to the edge of the forest. She stopped there, standing and smiling. "Only, Vitka, I got scared. I didn't go into the forest. Something wasn't right about Polka." "And what happened next?" I asked my uncle. My interest piqued. "Nothing. We went back to work. We look over and Polka had returned to her plot too and was raking hay. Then she started yelling something to us again and waving like, 'Come here.' So I say to Yekaterina, my grandmother's name, 'Don't look at her. She probably got too much sun on her head.' So we finished our work and we look over, and the elder's daughter is gone. We got back to the village and Katka ran straight to the chairman's house to ask Polinka what it was she had wanted. I stayed home and started unharnessing the horse when suddenly your grandmother runs in and says, 'Vitya, that was an evil spirit,' and she's bawling. 'What evil spirit?' I ask her. 'What nonsense are you talking about?' 'Polinka left for the city with her father this morning in the kolkhoz truck.' That gave me the creeps, but a shadow of a doubt remained. Maybe it was someone's sick joke. I calmed your grandmother down, went about my chores, and completely forgot about the incident, when suddenly I hear a car pull up to the chairman's house, and he gets out with his daughter. I found out later from the driver that they had indeed been in the city all day. During the following haymaking sessions, nothing unusual happened, but, as it turned out, that was only true for us. The villagers started saying they were seeing various people there, some familiar, some strangers, and some even saw themselves. At the kolkhoz meeting, before anything worse happened, everyone jointly decided to move the haymaking to other clearings. Fortunately, there were others available. Smaller, of course, but without any devilry. "And did it all go away?" I asked. "Yes, no one noticed anything else after that," said Uncle Vitya. "Well, here we are, almost there." And indeed, a small cabin was visible not far away, exactly past that field. Except recently, about 2 months ago, when I was doing my rounds, my companion continued, "I saw myself in this field." "What do you mean, yourself?" "Just like that. I look over and he's standing there, staring at me, a huge smile on his face, waving his hand weakly like, 'Come here,' my uncle answered. "And what did you do?" "What do you think?" I turned away, almost went completely gray on the spot, and kept walking. I didn't see anyone or anything else. I'll be honest, goosebumps broke out all over me at that moment, and I felt uneasy, realizing I was walking right next to the very place where all these stories had taken place. Lost in these thoughts, I didn't even notice that we had arrived. It was getting dark. We built a fire, cooked fish soup from the fish we'd caught, talked about this and that, had a little to drink. I knew Uncle Vitya wouldn't tell anyone about a couple shots of moonshine, and started getting ready for sleep. The hunting cabin was a log hut without windows, with a massive door and 2 bunks. I passed out almost immediately, but woke up because I heard someone's footsteps outside the door. Who can't sleep? I thought. But then I saw Uncle Vitya sitting next to the kerosene lamp, signaling me to keep quiet. I sat up too, but I wasn't scared. For some reason, I immediately thought it was a bear that had smelled our camp and come looking for whatever food the humans had left behind. We were, after all, behind the sturdy walls of a cabin with a heavy door and a bolt, and we also had rifles. But suddenly, everything went dead quiet. Then we heard someone walking around the cabin. Silence again, and suddenly, a knock at the door. I started shaking seriously, my heart pounding as if it were about to fly out of my chest, but my uncle was relatively calm and focused. "Who is it?" he asked. The response was silence, just a faint shuffling and shoves against the door. I broke out in a cold sweat and gripped my rifle tighter. "Who is it?" my uncle repeated. "Good people, let me in," someone outside the door said in a hoarse voice. "I just need some water and someone to show me the way." "We don't have any water and we don't know the way. Be on your way while you're still in one piece," Uncle Vitya answered him. "Let me in," the voice outside the door said again, accompanied by sharp jabs at the door. "What the fuck is this?" I squeezed out in a trembling voice. "I don't know," my uncle answered me, "but there are no feet and no shadow," and he pointed to the gap between the floor and the door. I looked there and saw nothing, even though someone was pushing and knocking on the door. I felt sick. A lump formed in my throat, and my temples throbbed with such incredible force that I thought my head would explode, and the knocking on the door and the phrase, "Let me in," was still continuing. Then they started pounding on the door with such force that I became genuinely terrified. Would it hold? After that thought, I lost consciousness. I came to in the morning. Uncle Vitya was sitting by the open door, smoking frantically. He told me that the whole nightmare had lasted until dawn and then everything just stopped. We quickly packed our gear and left. I never went deep into the taiga again, but one question remained. What was that, and what would have happened if we had opened the door? The village no longer exists. Some people moved to the cities to live with relatives. Aunt Galia passed away of natural causes, but that was after 2 people went missing without a trace in the village. My grandfather told me this story a couple of days ago. My grandpa was born in a small settlement in the Russian Far East, so small that it never even had its own name. It was just known by the dry name of the railway platform, 71st Kilometer, from which you had to trek another good half-hour deep into the taiga along a rutted path worn down by the locals. At one point, this settlement was the site of one of the many gulag camps. It was relatively small, no more than a few hundred people, and the prisoners there were tasked with maintaining the operability of the railway. But in 1946, after the disappearance of the deputy chief of this very camp, it was decided to liquidate it and transfer the prisoners to other facilities. However, someone still needed to maintain this section of the railway, and that's how this nameless settlement came to be. One fine summer day, my grandpa, who was just a 13-year-old kid at the time, went fishing with his 2 buddies, Misha and Yura, at a small lake near their settlement. The path leading to the lake ran along the edge of the forest and had been walked up, down, and across, as they say, so on this day, they decided to add a little variety to their usual route by taking a stroll through the woods. Turning off the path, they headed toward the lake, examining various pieces of driftwood they encountered along the way and enjoying the beauty of the far eastern forest. They got so distracted looking around that they didn't even notice how they strayed off the path and got lost. Fortunately, they were tough country boys, so they didn't panic, even though, to be honest, they were a bit scared. Misha, being the oldest at the time, he was already 14 and simultaneously the most brazen, commanded them to keep moving straight ahead and not to turn anywhere. His father was an experienced hunter and often took his son into the woods. Actually, this was how Misha knew that a small mountain river flowed in that direction, curving around the forest like a crescent moon and emptying into the very lake they were heading for. So, if they walked in that direction, there was no way they could wander too deep into the taiga. No sooner said than done. The boys resolutely set off along the chosen route, eagerly anticipating their encounter with the coveted river. And so, after a few hours of walking over the hills, they heard the longed-for babbling in the distance and, full of joy, ran toward the river to cool off a bit after their prolonged hike. But their joy was short-lived. While running, one of the boys, Yura, tripped over something and, with a scream, fell straight into the ground. Stunned by what had happened, the boys froze in place, and a moment later rushed to the spot where their friend had been running just a second before. There gaped a perfectly circular hole hollowed out of the stone. Yura was nowhere to be seen, but his crying could be heard clearly echoing from beneath the massive rock. "Yurok, how are you down there? You alive?" Misha yelled, bewildered. "Yeah, just hit myself really hard," he groaned pitifully in response. "Don't worry down there, we'll get you out in a sec." But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't help their comrade. Even the longest branch they snapped off didn't reach Yura, who was whimpering somewhere in the depths. Meanwhile, evening began to fall, and before it got completely dark, the boys decided to head to the settlement for help. Following the river downstream to the lake, they ran with all their might toward the settlement, and arrived by midnight. After telling their parents what had happened, they naturally received a good scolding, which, however, didn't upset them much. At that moment, they were far more troubled by thoughts of their friend, left alone to spend the night somewhere deep in the dense forest buried under a stone slab. By the way, regarding that stone slab with the strange circular hole, it was something akin to a dolmen. For those who don't know, dolmens are ancient burial structures, and they are found not only in the Far East but all over the planet in areas inhabited by ancient civilizations. Apparently, this is exactly what they had stumbled upon. So after they told their parents what had happened, the locals quickly held a council in one of the houses, grabbed all the tools they had on hand, and were just about to set out toward the forest. But then an old woman intervened, a Nanai woman by descent, who, upon hearing about dolmens, started wailing and recounting terrifying superstitions about evil spirits living inside them. She described everything so vividly that even the grown men felt uneasy. Basically, even though this was happening during the Soviet era, the people back then were still superstitious, so the men decided to wait for dawn before heading out to help. And in the morning, when they finally reached the boys' place of imprisonment, and to their horror, found no one there, even the toughest men started wailing like that old Nanai woman and recalling her stories. Shouting into the hole was useless. No one answered, so it was decided to climb down. But the hole was too narrow for a grown man to squeeze through, and no one in their right mind would agree to lower their child down there, so they decided to widen the opening. However, the task proved harder than it initially seemed. The slab was at least 3 feet thick, so it took them nearly the whole day to break a hole large enough. When the hole was finally broken through and one of the men lowered himself down on a rope, he found only Yura's grey cap lying alone on the damp stone floor, and barely 3 feet away from it gaped another black hole. As it turned out, what they had unearthed was only a small part of a massive dolmen. Beneath the slab was a square room measuring roughly 16 by 16 feet, and in the walls and floor of this room there were about a dozen more similar holes, each leading God knows where. For a few more days, Yura's parents clung to the hope that he was alive and had just fallen or hidden in one of those holes. They sat there day and night, waiting for their Yurka to return. And when all hope was finally lost, the local men gathered and buried the place to hell and back, so that, God forbid, no one else would fall in. And it would have been fine, just a seemingly ordinary story. Well, a boy fell into a hole. Well, he disappeared. There are thousands of these dolmens all over the world, but it wasn't that simple. About 5 years after this event, when my grandpa was getting ready to be sent off to the army, train engineers on a train near a platform with an equally resonant name, 45th Kilometer, found a young man. It was hard to determine his age by looking at him, as he was severely emaciated and disfigured, but his voice gave away his youth. Naturally, Yura's parents took an interest in this young man, and as soon as they heard about the strange discovery, they immediately traveled to the district center, to the clinic where he was being kept. And yes, it was that very same Yura, seemingly the same, yet entirely different. Not even that. Nothing remained of the cheerful, bright Yura he had been 5 years ago. Instead of blue eyes, empty sockets gaped, and he was missing both his hands, but his soul had endured the most terrifying changes. He had completely lost his mind, constantly talking about some god living in earthly flesh, about people long dead and those not yet born, and he even seemed to mention something about that same deputy camp chief. At night, he was tormented by nightmares, and he would scream hysterically, either curses or prayers, so loudly that the whole hospital could hear him. Therefore, it was decided to transfer him to a psychiatric hospital. 3 years later, when my grandpa returned from the army, word came that Yura had died. Or rather, not died. but killed himself. He had somehow managed to open the window in his ward and jump from the 5th floor. When the orderlies rushed over to him, he was still alive, and on his lips were words that, for some reason, forever etched themselves into my grandpa's memory, and now into mine. He is calling me, and I am going to him. And what will you do when he calls you too? So those are the stories, guys. Let me know what you liked and what you didn't. Make sure to drop a comment with your thoughts on the stories and the video overall. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, be sure to check out my other videos. Bye.